So, AMD Zen 4. It was over a year ago that I put any real effort into prominently confirming information 100% about the Zen 3 successor. The last time I did this was in my Years of Domination video, where I outlined my thesis that Intel was basically confirmed to be behind AMD, not just for 1 year, but for multiple years. I confirmed that Zen 3 would 100% crush both Comet Lake and Rocket Lake, and at a minimum, early information about Zen 4 suggested that Golden Cove would be lucky to catch up at all to where AMD would be by the time it comes out, and that because of all of this, it probably wouldn't be until 2023 that Intel had a real chance at going for the crown again. Now hold up, immediately I can feel the groans from some viewers going, duh, we already know this, but I don't think that's entirely fair. I think you guys might want to go back and look at forum posts from even after Zen 2 launched in early 2020. The common sentiment that I find when I go back and read old forum posts from that era is that a lot of people saw Zen 2 as a one-trick pony that AMD, sure, they pulled a rabbit out of a hat, but they can't go anywhere from here because they'll never fix the latency problems inherent in non-monolithic designs, and that Intel surely has some secret architecture they're going to roll out in 2020 that crushes AMD. It's basically the opposite of what ended up happening, and I can already feel people kind of feeling the inverse about Intel and AMD now, where they just expect huge things from AMD. Sometimes I'm concerned too huge, and nothing from Intel. Almost like Intel can't do anything. And I think that's just, it was dumb back then, and to think of it in the inverse is dumb now. So that's why I bring up that old video. Number one, it is to jog your memories that some stuff coming out now about Zen 4 was confirmed a year ago. Obviously, we knew about 5 nanometer, but we also knew about AVX 512, PCIe 5.0, which is coming to some Zen 4 products, by the way, but more on that in a few minutes. And then, of course, DDR5 support and big IPC and efficiency increases, bigger ones than Zen 3, which people were doubting back then, actually. And yeah, potential core counts increases. It's to remind you of what we already do know is confirmed about Zen 4 from as long as a year ago, and also just to remind everybody that what everyone kind of doubted would happen is now maybe overly assumed. Or is AMD's continued dominance overly assumed? Is Intel going to come back hard with Alder Lake and Raptor Lake in a way that can really contest Zen 4? Or is Zen 4 going to bury Alder Lake and Raptor Lake till Zen 5 comes out? Maybe the current sentiment is correct, actually. Did we underestimate how many years things may be bad for Intel? Before I go into my specific info summary, I do want to, give a shout out to ExecutableFix, because in some ways it can be annoying, but it's also been kind of fun to see him basically confirming things that I will put in my summary before I finish this video. So I can confirm independently that this guy clearly has some really good sources and that you should follow him on Twitter. And I think it's worth talking about at least the things I've noticed that he's publicly said up until this point. Oh, and I guess one more thing. Remember that Zen 4 is not design complete, and neither is the X670 chipset. So things can change. But anyways, at least for now, things that I've seen from ExecutableFix that I can independently verify are more or less what he said about the I/O and the power budgets AMD is planning for AM5. Clearly, and I'm just saying this right now, AM5 is built to grow to support more power-hungry and complex chips than AM4 ever remotely could. You know, AM4 was built for a standard TDP of around 100 watts, up to about 125, and that's just not the case with AM5. AM5 is built to natively support chips all the way up to 170 watts, with clear mentions to water cooling in some behind-the-scenes info I've seen. And additionally, yeah, the I/O will be better. There's an extra NVMe you can put in there compared to X570, and there will be more USB 3.2 drives. And of course, DDR5 instead of DDR4. But it's not quad channel memory like so many people seem to keep asking about. And it is just PCIe 4.0, which I can confirm at least right now. And again, I have to emphasize, as of now, AM5, or at least the initial chips that come out on it, will only have PCIe 4.0 support. And honestly, this shouldn't come as a surprise. I have extensively covered AMD's issues with PCIe 5.0 in recent videos and podcasts. If they're having a lot of trouble on the consumer platform, trouble means two things potentially: delays and extra money. And if you can cut costs and make sure something launches on time, 4.0 is more than enough. But let's not get bogged down in the I/O. I think you guys are most interested in the core chiplet design, which is 99% confirmed from my end to be 8-core CCDs, 8-core chiplets. Again, that these are much more performant cores than what was in Zen 3, and that they're just keeping to 8 cores per chiplet because, well, honestly, 8 is a good scalable number, and you don't necessarily need to put more cores in a CCD. It's probably just better for latency reasons to have more CCDs. And so then, yeah, you go, well, doesn't Genoa have 96 cores, supposedly? Yeah, it does. It should. It should have 96 cores. And then you go, okay, well, then so there will be 24 cores, 3 times 8 core chiplets on AM5, right? Well, this is where things get interesting in today's leak. One of the newer sources of mine that I've been holding back on using for months, well, frankly, stuff he sends me turns out to be true or not over time. That's how you make sure this person is legit. He told me months ago that PCIe 5.0 was actually undecided by AMD, and it was causing a lot of trouble for them trying to get it working in a reliable way that didn't cost a ton of money to make the motherboards, which, again, let's be clear, everyone, PCIe 5.0 is hard. I was the first one to confirm exclusively that Alder Lake would come with PCIe 5.0, but that it would only really be supported in the Time 16 PCIe slot for graphics cards. They still wouldn't get it up and running for NVMe drives yet. So, yeah, it's hard not just for AMD, but also for Intel. Anyways, that PCIe 5.0 wasn't the only tidbit. Another really interesting one was his thought that it seems like Zen 4, at least initially on AM5, may only come with 16 cores. And as I started to ask around a few sources, other people said similar things, that AMD actually might just go to 16 cores again on Zen 4. And honestly, I'm not sure if this should surprise people if 16 cores for the 6950X is what ends up happening. I mean, when you look at Genoa, yeah, they can fit more cores while using the same energy as Milan, but people are paying thousands of dollars for those chips, sometimes over $10,000. It's worth the money to have the best on the market, especially if you expect people who buy this to put up with expensive DDR5 next year. That's not always worth it for consumers. The more chips you put on there, whether another core chiplet or stacked memory, adds cost. And so, yeah, I guess what I'll say though is this. AM5 is built to support up to 24 cores. And one of my best sources said that at least within Intel, they believe AMD is launching a 24-core Raphael, and that they are planning their business around the idea that AMD will launch this. So at this point, here's what I think we can say. AM5 can support 24 cores, and there are 24-core designs. It's one of my best sources. He's never led me astray here. AMD can launch a 24-core if they want to, but right now AMD's got to be asking themselves two things. Number one, Zen 4 will bring another large IPC increase, likely bigger than Zen 3, with new instruction sets, greater efficiency, and new features. It's going to be a sweet generation. Does the consumer version need more than 16 cores? Do they really need it? I honestly think it's a fair question. I think that Alder Lake may have trouble fully beating Zen 3, let alone Zen 4 with the same core count. And then they've also got to be asking themselves, point number two, even if Alder Lake and Raptor Lake are somewhat competitive with a 16-core Zen 4, is launching a more expensive I/O die, maybe one that supports PCIe 5.0 and 24 cores, worth launching even if AMD's performance lead isn't as big as it could be because of cost. Because that is another thing that's been heavily confirmed, that if there is a 24 core, do not expect it for the same price as the 5950X. But again, this doesn't mean AMD won't, or certainly not that they can't launch a 24 core. They have 24 core models. They can launch them. And in fact, there's even some suggestion that they're considering an X690 that will be even more expensive that could have PCIe 5.0. So all of these things are possible. I just don't think people should expect it right now. And so, well, I think I've gone on enough. I've given credit to other people I think you should check out, and I've talked about some of the process of digging for this leak. Let's summarize this leak. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by DataCamp. DataCamp is an online learning platform that makes it easy to build data analytical skills at your own pace with interactive courses. And when I say courses, there are over 350 courses and interactive learning experiences that can improve your data skills, from things as simple as introductions to Excel to writing efficient Python code. Regardless of the industry or career stage you are in, an ability to show true analytical comprehension of the data being used by your industry, and all industries do utilize massive amounts of data now, is essential to either standing out or getting ahead. And it is easy to leverage DataCamp since they allow you to combine video classes with practical exercises that come in shortened bite-sized lengths that are doable on mobile, so you can always improve daily no matter how busy your schedule gets. And if you weren't sure where to start, you can take a free assessment to give personalized learning recommendations before you jump in. And if you do decide to jump in, make sure you use the link in the description so they know Moore's Law is Dead sent you. This really does help the channel. And either way, just remember, the first chapters of DataCamp courses are free. Use DataCamp today. All right, AMD Zen 4 early leak, late May 2021. Let's talk about what I can summarize about Zen 4 and then get into if Intel stands a chance. And again, I'm going to say it and show it on the slide. It must be emphasized that Zen 4 is not design complete, and that I do expect some things to change. That this is accurate info as of today for what AMD is planning. Now, the Zen 4 core architecture on TSMC 5 nanometer. It should have an above 20% IPC increase over Zen 3. This is basically unanimous that the IPC increase is generally expected to be bigger than what Zen 3 brought over Zen 2. In fact, I have heard some references to IPC increases notably above 20, but none from my trusted sources. And for now, I just would say assume above 20% or around there, and it could be higher, but I don't think you should bet on it yet. Additionally, it will have 8-core chiplets, a 50% plus performance per watt increase in Genoa over Milan. And I say in Genoa over Milan because that's, I don't know, best case scenario, but close. And well, we'll get into why it might be a little different on AM5. It will have AVX 512 support. That's not really new. And then, well, let's get into the desktop version, Raphael. There is 24-core designs out there, but I cannot confirm AMD will launch them immediately. I could see them launching a 16-core first, and then following up with a 24-core once they both feel the need and get that I/O die working. Remember, having two I/O dies may make sense if one is much cheaper and less complex. Nonetheless, of course, they will have at least 16 cores at launch. Additionally, as of now, 6 nanometer actually seems to be the node for the I/O die, based on what multiple sources have told me. Now, I can't say all sources know, so I'm going to leave this in the white text, but it's worth remembering that Rembrandt will be coming out before Zen 4, and that will share a very similar I/O setup to Zen 4 Raphael. And so you can see why they might have a similar configuration in Rembrandt and then iterate on that for the I/O die in Zen 4. Although, of course, Rembrandt will have less PCIe 4.0 lanes, probably for the graphics card, because in mobile you don't need more than 8 lanes. And again, this really isn't that new, but dual-channel DDR5 5200 is the current target speed. Again, multiple sources verify this. And you should be able to support 3 NVMe 4.0 drives, and more USB ports than on X570. And of course, these USB ports will be on the 3.2 specification. And 28 lanes of PCIe 4.0 as they basically danced around for X670. Don't rule out an X690 platform, although certainly I am not confirming that, but there is suggestion AMD could launch that for their Halo models this generation. And an interesting thing is that native USB 4.0 support is disputed. Now, I know it's in the Rembrandt APU, but I can't say for sure it's in X670. All I can say is that it's in Rembrandt, and let's leave it at that for now, but that some of my sources do also believe it's in Raphael. And also, I can't confirm really anything about the integrated graphics, but it's universal that Raphael has integrated graphics in at least some of the models it will be launching with. And at this time, also, I don't know if this isn't surprising, but no 3D stacking is mentioned by anyone in Raphael. We'll get to Genoa in a second, but for now, I wouldn't bet on it being in there. You know, a lot of people wondered if Alder Lake would be 3D stacked because Lakefield was as well, but as far as I'm aware, nope, not in Alder Lake, not in Raphael, and it's because these are more consumer-oriented platforms, and well, 3D stacking is really expensive, you guys. All right, Genoa Epic. So the initial target for Genoa is a 50% performance per watt increase over Milan. For now, that's how I would think of what the efficiency increase will be for Zen 4 products over their predecessors in general. But remember, the socket for AM5 is meant to support much higher power usage than AM4. So if they don't launch with 24 cores, well, it wouldn't surprise me if they push some of the top 16 and 12 core chips extra hard to make up for that and beat Alder Lake at just about everything. And additionally, again, 96 core models exist for Genoa with 12-channel memory controllers. There are 128 lanes of PCIe 5.0 supported, although I am hearing about troubles with the furthest slots on motherboards supporting 5.0 signaling. You know, the farther you get away from the socket, it's becoming a real issue. So I wouldn't be surprised if some products, especially if, you know, whenever they bring out a Threadripper version of this, had 4.0 in bottom slots, or again, if the motherboards were just a lot more expensive than the preceding ones. And there will be 3D stacked Zen 4 Epic models. Again, this is where I will say, look, Lisa Su just confirmed Genoa is launching in 2022. In fact, let's take a listen here.
So Harlan, you asked about our next generation, our Genoa product family, which is slated for 5 nanometer in 2022. And we're right on track with that as well. And, you know, lots of customer interest with that as well. So I think, you know, key in this market is just a steady, you know, very competitive roadmap. And, you know, I'm pleased with, you know, the progress that we've made.
Now, the only other things to confirm in this leak are that, as of now, Zen 4 is expected to launch in Q3 of 2022 by pretty much every single source I've talked to. Initially, it was more of a Q1 through 2 launch time frame, but shortages in designing, frankly, most of Zen 4 during a pandemic have delayed things. And so Q3 is where I think you should expect it to come out as of now. And because there's pretty much no chance of any paper launches for Zen 4 in December, and again, I'll tell you if this changes, but that's what I'm hearing. If I was AMD, I wouldn't even tease Zen 4 in 2021 during the holiday season. I just try to push people towards Zen 3 and the XT refresh that's probably coming out. Unless Alder Lake ends up beating Zen 3 better at more things than expected, and then I guess maybe they will. But yeah, so I would think of this year as another Zen 3 year from AMD's department. There is a narrow chance Zen 4 could launch in Q2, I guess I'll say. But there's also a narrow chance it could slip to Q4. Again, think of it as Q3. And it is also worth mentioning that it has been suggested that AM5 could launch early 2022 with the Rembrandt APUs. Remember, AMD's done this before with their APUs for AM4, so I wouldn't rule that out either. And it has also been suggested, though, that if you're depressed that Zen 4 is basically coming, you know, more of a year and a half or a little over that amount of time instead of, you know, what's typically been 12 to 14 months from Zen 2 to Zen 3, Zen 5 is, as of now, expected to follow a quicker cadence than Zen 4. Zen 4 is a big uplift. Zen 5, not to saying it won't be a bigger uplift too, but Zen 5 is more expected to follow the usual kind of 12 to 14 month cadence. All right, now let's talk about what this really means for Intel. Okay, so bigger than Zen 3 IPC increases, massive efficiency increases that at the very least will certainly be better than the efficiency increases Intel's expected to bring with their 10 nanometer products. And better I/O than X570. Does Alder Lake stand a chance against Zen 4? Does Sapphire Rapids stand a chance? Well, when you ask people at Intel, actually, it's funny. They say that they know they're not going to compete in multi-threading with Zen 4, but that they're hoping to narrowly keep the gaming crown again that they've recently lost with Rocket Lake versus Zen 3. Well, I don't know, though. I know that I've confirmed that Golden Cove will bring a 20% IPC increase, or at least around a 20% single-threaded performance increase over Rocket Lake and Willow Cove. But if that's true, Zen 4 looks like it's in at least a 20% IPC increase. And when we look at a recent hardware and box comparison of Cypress Cove and Zen 3, and Cypress Cove's only a few percent behind Willow Cove on 10 nanometer, I just can't help but think that it seems like most likely AMD is going to keep the single-threaded performance crown by just a little bit and then crush Intel and multi-threaded again. That basically the situation we have now isn't going to change that much, that at best Intel will chip away at what AMD's lead is, which is better than the current situation, I guess. But yeah, I guess that brings us to the question, right, of will AMD be stagnating if they do it again? 16 cores is the top core count on consumer. It's been the 3950X, the 5950X, and possibly the 6950X. If that happens, there's no 24 core. Can you call that stagnation? Well, look, a few generations, like 4 years roughly, of using the same top core count when it's basically double what your competitor is at least the entire time. I don't know that you can say that's stagnation. Intel, at least not compared to what Intel did, where they just had quad cores for like a decade. I don't think it's the same situation. But I will say that if they were to do it again with Zen 5, which I don't think they will, by the way, I would say that there's at least the hints that AMD's stagnating a little bit, or at least doesn't feel very threatened right now. And I think that we can conclude they don't necessarily need to feel super threatened. They're going to win with 16 or 24 cores, but at the very least, they will be leaving a smaller margin of error. For example, I'm told that Intel is actually now considering launching a 72-core version of Sapphire Rapids. And with stacked memory on it as well, I don't know. Look, Genoa with 96 cores, and there will be 3D stacked versions of Genoa. That is going to beat a 72-core Sapphire Rapids at almost everything most likely, but that margin of error isn't there that it used to be, is it? When it used to be 28 cores from Intel versus 64 from AMD. What if Alder Lake's better than expected? What if it does take the single-threaded performance crown? What if the little cores on Alder Lake perform better than you think? Then it's going to be close. And what if Raptor Lake, which I'm hearing is a performance increase over Golden Cove in Alder Lake, that Raptor Lake is not just a slight tick, that it will have some performance enhancements? Yeah, I mean, if Zen 4 doesn't launch till Q3 next year, could AMD be cutting it close if they just launch a 16-core against Raptor Lake? Well, I think the answer is maybe. And so I guess what I will say is this. I don't personally think it's fair if Raphael goes to 16 cores again for people to say AMD's stagnating like Intel did. 3 to 4 years instead of a decade at the same core count is a much bigger difference, than what happened before with Intel, especially when you consider the massive IPC increases and efficiency increases AMD's bringing that Intel did not bring at the same pace back then. But what I will say is there is less of a margin for error and forgiveness for AMD the more they don't push it as hard as we know they can. And I think that AMD's had basically a 100% lead overall for a couple of years now, and that's insane. But that once it starts shrinking below a 50% lead, if that were to happen, there's less margin for error. And I'd like a little bit more margin for error for a little bit longer now. I want AMD to be powerful enough for this competition to last, for Intel to feel the heat under them as hard as possible for as long as possible. Because whether it's from Lisa or from Pat, I want the best competition possible in 2025 and onwards. So yeah, that's basically what I can confirm about AMD Zen 4 right now. But I do expect some things to change, and there will of course be more leaks from me before this thing comes out, because that's probably over a year from now. Look, when something's design complete, the soonest you expect the product to launch 10 months later. So unless it's announced to be design complete like right now within a month, it's not coming out till Q3. So you've still got a lot of waiting to do, and there's a lot more to be said. That's that. One thing I do have to sneak in at the end of this video is a word about AMD FSR. Now, it's not a secret that I've been very skeptical about AMD FSR about a month ago, but some of you may have noticed that I tweeted out last night something that states quite the opposite, that I'm becoming increasingly confident that AMD FSR is indeed capable of launching a month from now. And that's because I've seen the drivers that are preparing to launch it. And I already confirmed in that tweet that clearly they're distinguishing between settings for APUs and dedicated graphics cards. So that's exciting to see at least some APUs will be covered by FSR, though technically I can't confirm how old they will be or if it's even Vega ones just yet. Although I can confirm RDNA 1 is in there, guys. What I can say is this, though. There's a very juicy tidbit that, well, I'm not ready to double down on specifics yet, is worth getting out there because I think it just makes so much sense. You know, this is not a sharpening filter. It's very different from DLSS, but it is accelerated, and there is evidence even of FSR having enhanced hardware acceleration on a next generation of RDNA hardware, almost certainly RDNA 3. So think about what that kind of points to for AMD's game plan here with FSR. AMD seems to be planning to have an easy to implement, much easier than DLSS, super sampling, kind of smoothing out high resolution images for a performance boost tech that, well, maybe not as good as the best DLSS 2.1 implementations, will be supported across notebooks, consoles, and dedicated gaming desktops. And it's easier to implement, so devs are more likely to use it. That could gain a lot of support quickly, I think. And although AMD would be letting NVIDIA potentially use this, that doesn't mean this couldn't give them a much bigger advantage than if they didn't. Because if it does become widely supported, and they've had the time to optimize RDNA 3 to accelerate it with dedicated hardware much faster than anything on the market, this is kind of just a mind-blowingly brilliant move on AMD's part. It's an open standard. They're the good guy. And it also means that it'll probably get much wider acceptance than DLSS. And then once it's accepted by late next year by most games, RDNA 3 comes out and can accelerate it better than anyone else. So maybe others can use it, but does it matter if RDNA 3 is accelerating it better than anyone else? I don't think it does. I think it's a much better strategy than the closed-off DLSS approach NVIDIA's taking. And, well, to hear more about it, and I'm sure you will, you'll have to stay tuned for future videos. Remember to subscribe to the YouTube channel, ring the bell button, share these videos if you've enjoyed them to grow the community. And if you want to become a bigger part of the community, remember that there is a Patreon that pays me, Dan, Gerard, the entire Moore's Law is Dead team, and gives you early ad-free access to tons of podcasts, exclusive podcasts that are only on the Patreon, the ability to ask questions of guests on those podcasts, and of course access to the Discord where you can talk about the latest videos with me and the community after they come out. You can talk to us right now after this just came out. So remember, that's out there if you have the extra money. And otherwise, as always, thank you for watching.